Oh hey, I didn't see you over there. Today I'm going to be changing out the wheel bearing on my Pontiac G6 2006 here. It's the V6 and I think it's 3.5 liter engine. The front bearing here started making some vibration noise in the last couple days, and based on my experience with this car, that is definitely the wheel bearing. You can tell as you're driving, if you jerk the car to the left or right, it'll put more weight on either side, and you can really hear it get louder or quieter depending on which side it's on. So to do this project, we have a variety of tools we're going to use. Assortment of sockets for the axle nut. This is a 36mm axle nut socket. You can go down to like AutoZone or something like that, and they'll have a loaner tool bin, and you can check these out for free. You just have to return them and you'll get your money back. I think it's $20 to rent it, and then you turn it back in and you get all that back. This is pretty much a necessity to get that axle nut off. That in combination with your impact wrench here, this will take off that nut like it's nothing. So very good tool to have. To actually remove the bearing, we have a set of bearing or gear pullers here. These bearings, they'll get seized up inside the race housing, and it makes it easy to get out. This just clamps around the bearing, and then the center spindle here goes into the end of the axle, so it just pulls it out as you crank on it with your 1/2-inch socket. Other tools we have torque wrench to torque everything back to spec once we get done putting this all together, and that's basically it. Here we have my new bearing assembly. Cost about $75 online. Found some coupon codes, so it's a little bit cheaper. But this is a new assembly. Sounds smooth. You don't hear any rattling. That's hopefully what the new one will sound like once we get it on there. It won't make any noise. So let's get this car jacked up, and we'll get the wheel off and start our project. Okay, so we've taken our wheel and our rotor off. Rotor's right here. And first we had to remove the brake caliper assembly. And there's two 5/8 bolts on the back side of that that hold that into place onto the, I guess I don't know what the name of the part is, the axle arm itself, where the wheel and the rotor and that whole assembly fastens to. So there's two 5/8 bolts. You have to remove those first. They tend to be kind of tricky to get off. They put Loctite on there, I believe, to keep them snug. So you may need a breaker bar or something to that extent. If you don't have one of those, I found that the back side of my jacked assembly, the handle for that works good if you just slide your socket wrench into that, and then you have a little extra leverage to break these free. Make sure that your socket is set to the right position, so you know it's unscrewing the bolt and you're not actually torquing to tighten it up. I've sheared bolts off that way before, and you know something like this that can be kind of tricky to get yourself out of if you happen to do that. So make sure lefty-loosey, righty-tighty. Word of the wise. So next step we have here, we're going to remove our axle nut, and then there's 3 bolts on the back side, and I believe those are 1/2-inch bolts on the back side that hold this whole assembly into place here. So once we remove this axle bolt, or axle nut, we'll remove the 3 bolts on the back side, and then we'll put the pullers on it to take this hull assembly right off here. So here we go, we're going to remove the axle nut. Make sure my wrench is off too and not on. Okay, so we've taken off the bolts from the back side of the wheel bearing assembly. And they color code them from the factory, so these ones are actually blue, and the ones for the brake caliper setup are green. I didn't mention before, but when you undo the caliper, you kind of want to get it out of the way so it's not stressing the actual brake line. So what I did, I just took a bungee cord and I strapped it up to your spring up here, just to kind of hold it up out of the way and to relieve any strain on that brake line. There's 3 of these bolts on the back side of the bearing assembly. The one on the top side can be kind of tricky to get to just because it's right underneath this top piece that comes into the assembly. So you kind of got to just play around with it and figure out what works best for you. For me, I just got a deep well 1/2" socket instead of putting a extender on it, and that seemed to work the best for me. But you might find something better. The two on the side, they're pretty easy. Like I mentioned before, though, you might need a little breaker bar or something like that just to loosen them up a little bit. So now that we have those off, we're clear to actually pull the assembly out. There's nothing else holding it in. It's just seated back into this housing. And so I have my puller on here with my 1/2" wrench, and it's a 3/4" socket. So I guess we can just start tightening this up, and it should pop free here in a few turns, if everything goes right. At first you'll see that your actual axle is getting pushed back in towards the vehicle, which is fine, but there's going to be a point where it can't go back any further, and that's where you'll see it tension up around the assembly, and it should pop off then. Emphasis on should. Yeah, right now it's getting back to the point where it doesn't want to slide back any further. So it should tighten up on you, and this will come off in a second here. After a little bit of that, it finally came dislodged from the housing, and you can see it's all corroded around the edge here. So I'm going to actually have to clean up the inside of this housing. There's a seal that goes in here, and I'm going to have to clean that all out and get it ready for the new assembly. I'm listening to this thing real quick, and I can hear that it's rough. You know, it doesn't sound like it's a clean assembly. So that would imply that there, in fact, was some dirt or water or a combination of everything that got in past the housing, or it just had a lot of miles on it and started to break down. So this one is definitely bad, and the next steps that we're going to take here, we're going to clean up this housing, and we're going to put in our new assembly. We'll get it bolted down with the same 3 bolts on the backside that I took off. We'll get the brake caliper assembly put back on with the rotor and get it all buttoned up, torqued down to spec, and it should be good to go. Okay, so I have the new assembly all lined up here, and right now I'm just getting the 3 bolts from the backside put back in and tightened down. Getting this all lined up was just a little tricky. Just hold this plate up in place while you're trying to slide it back on the axle. There's a lot of things going on at once, so you kind of gotta be multi-talented. And again, this top one here is really a pain to get into. I don't know if you can see it at all, but the shock that comes down and then that holds everything here, that's really what's getting in the way of getting a wrench back up in there. So you kind of got to feel around, see that it gets seated properly, and then you can kind of crank on it. But you still got to go slow and be careful, because you don't want to shear off that bolt or strip the head of it at all. So again, the last one, it's a blue bolt, and this one just goes in on the bottom left side over here. You can kind of get it started without the wrench. So now we have our hub assembly back on, and we have to put our axle nut back on. We're using our 36mm socket that we got on lease from AutoZone in town, and we have our torque wrench. They say that for the axle nut, it's the same torque as your lug nuts, which I just looked up in the manual, and that's 100 foot-pounds of torque for this vehicle. It might be different for other vehicles, so this is just for this vehicle. So we're going to put our thing on here. You can tighten it down first because it's not a ratchet, so we can just start to crank this down. And this will take a minute. So, until we get it all the way down, I'm going to go back to my 1/2" wrench here And we're just going to wrap it in place until it's snug, and then we can actually do the torque on it. Also, everything I've read, they say don't use your impact wrench on this, just because it can make it too tight and it can screw up your bearing right from the get-go. So that's why we're actually going to torque it to spec for this. Okay, so now it's snug, and I'm going to switch back to my torque. We're going to put 100 foot-pounds torque on this. Right now we're at about 40, so we got a little ways to go. We're at about 60 to 80 right now. That's definitely 80. And that's about our 100 right there. So I'm going to line this up and make sure one more time. That's about 100 foot-pounds of torque right there. So now that we have that done, we can swing our brake assembly back into line. Well, first you got to put our rotor back on, then we can swing the brake assembly onto the rotor. Finish up our last couple bolts and put the wheel back on, and we'll be good to go. Now we have our rotor and our brake caliper assembly back into place. When you're doing a project like this would also be a good time to check out your brake pads, to check the life of them. I changed these out maybe 2 years ago. I put 30,000 or so miles on them. I just checked them, and it looks like the pads still have plenty of life left. The rotors are still smooth. They're not feeling pitted or grooved or anything like that. So I don't have to do anything else with this assembly today, which is good. So all I have left to do now is to put my wheel back on, get the lug nuts in, and then I'm done. And so that's really this whole project from beginning to end. You know, we took the wheel off, removed the rotor and the caliper assembly, and we did that with our two 5/8" bolts on the back side. And then we removed the 3 1/2" bolts for the actual bearing hub assembly. We removed those. We put our puller on there, and we pulled the bearing off of the housing, cleaned it all up, and then we just put it back together in reverse order, putting the hub assembly, our new hub assembly on, replacing the axle nut, putting the rotor, and then putting the brake calipers back on. So now all I have to do, I have to finish putting this wheel on, and I'm done. So I want to say thank you for watching this video. I hope you learned something today. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the comments section, and I'll try and respond to them. So yeah, thanks.